He drove past her 3 times. He didn't stop. He didn't slow down. He didn't roll down the window or call out or send anyone to check on her. He just watched an old woman pushing a grocery cart full of flowers through a December ice storm and told his driver to keep going. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his car. She didn't know that the man watching her through tinted glass had spent the last 11 years building a floral distribution empire worth $340 million on the belief that the flower business was about logistics, not sentiment. She didn't know that by the time she finally reached the farmer's market, with frostbitten hands and a cart held together by duct tape and sheer will, she would force him to remember something he'd spent a decade trying to bury. And neither of them would leave that market the same person they'd arrived as. Everett Kane had not built a business by listening to what people said about themselves. He had built it by watching what they did when the stakes were real and nobody was keeping score. At 54, he had the particular stillness of a man who had taught himself to feel nothing quickly. He sat in the back of a black Escalade on a frozen Tuesday morning in late December, parked on the service road that ran behind the Charlotte Regional Farmers Market. The heat in the car was set to 74 degrees. His coffee, black, from a place his assistant sourced specifically because the beans were roasted the same morning, sat in a ceramic cup in the console beside him. His coat, charcoal cashmere, hung over the seat back without a wrinkle. He had learned a long time ago that comfort was something you built around yourself deliberately, and once you had it, you did not let it go. The market didn't open for vendors until 6:30. It was 5:47. He was early because he was always early. Observation required arriving before anyone else thought to perform. He had built Kane Floral Group from a single refrigerated van and a route that covered 4 counties in western North Carolina. Now he ran 23 distribution centers across 7 states, moved over 2 million stems a week, and supplied regional grocers, event planners, hotels, and airport terminal shops from Virginia to Florida. The company had revenues that made people uncomfortable at dinner parties if they asked the wrong question. Everett had been on the cover of 2 trade magazines and turned down a third because the interviewer wanted to call him a visionary, and he found the word hollow. He had been coming to this market every 6 months for 3 years. Not to buy flowers. He already had suppliers. He came to watch the small vendors, the ones operating on the margin between stubborn hope and financial collapse, because he believed that was where real skill lived. Under pressure, with no safety net, people became exactly who they were. His method was simple and, his legal team had once suggested, probably not something he should discuss in polite company. He arrived early. He watched vendors set up. He observed how they moved, what they prioritized, how they handled equipment failure or weather problems or difficult customers. Then he made acquisition offers. Not to the prettiest booths or the vendors with the cleanest branding, to the ones whose hands moved like they had something to prove. He had acquired 4 small businesses this way in the past decade. All 4 were now profitable divisions of Kane Floral Group. The founders of 2 of them had become regional managers. He had a theory about grit that he had never put into a press release because grit was not something you quantified for an investor deck. You just knew it when you watched someone work. He looked at his phone. The temperature was 28 degrees outside. A light sleet had begun falling around 5 a.m., coating the loading dock pavement in a thin, translucent layer that caught the overhead lights and threw them back distorted. The forecast called for the sleet to turn to freezing rain by mid-morning. Market management had not canceled. Vendors had been notified and told to make their own decision about attendance. Everett scrolled through the vendor list he'd been sent by the market's operations manager, a contact he'd cultivated carefully over 2 years. 41 registered vendors for the winter market. He'd already looked up 38 of them. Social media presence, sales history where he could find it, any news coverage. He would know it when he saw it. He heard the cart before he saw her. The sound was specific. One wheel that didn't turn properly, dragging against the pavement with a rhythmic metallic scrape that cut through the sleet and the distant hum of refrigeration units. He looked toward the far end of the service road and saw a woman coming around the corner, pushing a grocery cart so loaded with bundled flowers that the arrangement reached nearly to her chin. She was somewhere in her 60s, possibly early 70s. Short, broad-shouldered, wearing a winter coat that had been a good coat once, probably 15 years ago, in a shade of green that had faded at the elbows and collar. On her feet, rubber-soled boots, the kind sold at hardware stores. Her hair was silver, pulled back under a wool hat that had a small tear above the left ear. She pushed the cart with both hands, leaning into it slightly, her body compensating for the broken wheel, with a small correction on every rotation that had probably become unconscious from repetition. The cart was held together in two places by duct tape, along one side panel and around the handlebar where the plastic grip had broken away. It moved with the particular stubbornness of something that had no business still functioning, but had not received that information. Everett watched her pass under the first overhead light, then the second. She didn't look up. She was watching the pavement, choosing her path around patches of ice with a care that was practiced, not panicked. She'd done this before in weather like this. She knew exactly where the ice collected on this loading dock. That was the kind of knowledge you only got from showing up. He said nothing to his driver. He watched. She reached the market entrance gate, which was locked until 6:30. She stopped. Set the brake on the cart. A piece of bent wire looped around a spoke that she hooked over the frame with a practiced flick. Then she stood in the sleet, hands on her hips, looking at the gate. Not frustrated, just calculating. She walked to the intercom panel on the gatepost and pressed the call button, waited, pressed it again. The gate opened 3 minutes later. She didn't rush. She released the brake, adjusted her grip, and pushed the cart through the opening with the same steady pace she'd had since Everett first saw her on the service road. He watched the gate close behind her. His driver, a quiet man named Philip who had been with him for 9 years, adjusted the rearview mirror without being asked. "Same vendor you watched last time?" Philip asked. Everett shook his head. "New one." He looked down at his phone and searched the vendor list. Booth 14, Maplewood Blooms, owner listed as Nadine Thibodeau. He had not looked her up. He hadn't gotten to the T's yet. "Philip," he said, "pull around to the main entrance. We're going in." The market's interior was large, industrial, heated just enough to keep the flowers from freezing. Concrete floors, metal roof, fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency that gave sensitive people headaches. 41 vendor stalls arranged in 4 rows. Most of them still half-assembled at 6:45. People moving quickly, breath misting in the cold air, boxes stacked, tarps removed, price signs written by hand and laminated. Everett moved through the space, quietly. He had learned to be unremarkable in situations like this. A man in an expensive coat attracted attention he didn't want. He'd left the cashmere in the car. He found booth 14 in the 3rd row, near the back. She had transformed the space. In the 20 minutes since he'd watched her enter, Nadine Thibodeau had built a full display. White and green, winter colors, but not the generic kind. She had used eucalyptus, white ranunculus, silver dollar stems, and something with small dark berries he couldn't immediately identify. The arrangement was not the work of someone who had learned flowers from a book. The proportions were instinctive, the textures layered with an understanding of how people's eyes moved through space. Small bundles in the front, structured arrangements in the back. Price tags written in a clean, firm hand. $12, $18, $24 for the large. She was still working. She had a small folding table behind the display where she was assembling additional bundles, hands moving with a speed that came from having done the same motion so many times it no longer required thought. Her fingers were red from the cold. She had taken her gloves off to do the detailed work. On the cart beside her, 5 more cardboard boxes, still sealed. She would not run out of inventory. She had planned for a full day. Everett stood at the edge of the aisle and watched. He held a cup of market coffee he'd bought at the front entrance, something to do with his hands. A few other early browsers passed. No one stopped at her booth yet. At 7:15, the market opened to the public and foot traffic picked up. Everett positioned himself near a structural column 15 feet from booth 14 and watched. She was good with people, not in the practiced way of a salesperson who has attended a customer service workshop. In the older way, the way people are when they have spent a long time genuinely caring about what they do. She remembered names. A woman in a red coat who she called Loretta, not the Loretta from his list, a different Loretta, a customer, got a brief update about an order from 2 weeks ago. A man with a young child got a recommendation and a small stem of eucalyptus tucked into the girl's jacket pocket as a gift, no charge, without fanfare. She had a small sign on the corner of her table that read, "All arrangements made by hand in Cabarrus County, North Carolina. Family farm, no distributors." That last part was pointed. She knew exactly who her competition was. By 8 o'clock, she had sold 11 bundles. Everett had counted. Booth 14 was pulling traffic away from 3 better-positioned stalls closer to the entrance. People walked past prettier setups to come back to her. That was not an accident. That was a product of something that could not be manufactured with better signage. He approached the booth at 8:20. She looked up when he stopped. Brown eyes, direct, with the particular steadiness of someone who had learned to read strangers quickly because strangers were how her business survived. "The darkberries," he said. "What are those?" "Hypericum," she said. "Farmers call them coffee berries sometimes. They hold up in the cold better than most. Good for winter arrangements. Did you grow them?" "Everything in this booth came off my land or my sister's land 12 miles north of here." She said it without pride or defensiveness. "Just information." He nodded, bought a $24 arrangement, paid cash, and walked away without asking anything else. He came back at 9:45. The sleet had gotten worse. 2 vendors in the row nearest the main entrance had packed up and left. The foot traffic had thinned. Nadine's booth still had 3 customers around it. Everett stood at the column and thought about the first time he'd seen his mother's hands in winter. She had been 51. He had been 23. It was the last winter before she got sick, before the diagnosis, before the year that had reshaped everything he thought he knew about time and obligation, and what it meant to be present for someone. His mother had kept a flower garden in the backyard of the house in Kannapolis. Nothing commercial. Just zinnias and black-eyed Susans and some roses that bloomed once in May and then again in September if the summer had been kind. She'd kept it through 3 decades of night shifts at the textile mill, through 2 surgeries, through the winter his father left and the years that came after. He had come home for Christmas that year and found her in the garden in 30-degree weather with no gloves, deadheading the last of the fall stems before the hard freeze set in. He'd asked her why she didn't just wait for spring. She'd said something he hadn't understood at the time. "Things left untended in winter don't always come back in spring, Everett. Sometimes you have to be there even when there's no good reason to be." She died in April of the following year. He had not been there at the end. He had been in Charlotte, closing a deal on his second refrigerated warehouse. He told himself for a long time that she would have understood. He was less certain of that now. He turned back toward booth 14. He went home at 11 without introducing himself. He sat in the car while Philip drove and pulled up Maplewood Blooms online. No website. A Facebook page, last updated 4 months ago, with photos of arrangements and a phone number. 42 followers. 1 review, 5 stars, from someone named Bertrice, who said the flowers at her granddaughter's wedding had been the most beautiful she'd ever seen. He searched property records for Cabarrus County. Nadine Thibodeau. 6.3 acres, purchased 12 years ago. The property had a lien on it. He looked closer. She had taken out a small business loan 4 years ago and had been making payments. The balance remaining was $41,000. He searched her name in the state business registry. Maplewood Blooms, LLC. Active. Annual revenue filed with the state, $62,000 last year. The year before, $49,000. Growth, but slow. The kind of growth that meant she was doing everything right and the math still didn't get easier. He set his phone down, Philip glanced in the rearview mirror. "Everything okay, sir?" Everett looked out the window at the Charlotte's skyline passing on the left, glass and steel, and carefully managed distances between everything. "Fine," he said. But the honest answer was more complicated than that, and he knew it. The honest answer involved a dead woman's flower garden, a pair of bare hands in 30-degree weather, and the specific discomfort of watching someone work with that much care and knowing that the math of their situation was working against them regardless. He went back to the market the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. He said nothing to Nadine either time beyond a brief exchange about the flowers. He bought something each visit. He paid in cash, he observed. What he saw over those 3 weeks was consistent in a way that expensive data analysis could not replicate. She arrived first. She stayed last. She talked to every customer who slowed near her booth whether they bought anything or not. She tracked her own inventory by hand in a small spiral notebook. She adjusted her pricing on slow days, not dropping quality, adjusting bundle size, without changing her signs, just explaining it personally to buyers. She knew what was moving and what wasn't, and she responded in real time without a system or software, purely on accumulated knowledge. On the third Tuesday, it was raining. Cold rain, not sleet, but the kind that came down sideways and made the market parking lot a reflecting pool of gray light. Foot traffic was down 40% from the previous week. Nadine had still come. She had still brought 6 boxes of inventory. By noon, she had sold roughly half of it. Everett watched a younger vendor, 2 booths down, pack up at 11 and carry his merchandise out cursing under his breath at the weather. Nadine reorganized her display after he left, spreading her arrangements slightly into the visual space his absence created. She did it without looking around to check if anyone noticed. Just an adjustment to new conditions. He walked to the booth. "You've seen me 3 times now," she said before he could speak. He stopped. "A man who buys one arrangement a visit and spends more time looking than shopping," she said. She was wrapping a bundle with twine and did not look up. "Either you're a journalist or you're in the flower business and you're curious about mine." He said nothing. She set down the bundle and looked at him. "Which is it?" "The second one," he said. She studied him for a moment. "Kane Floral Group," she said. "I know who you are. You bought Clearwater Farms 2 years ago." "Clearwater used to sell at this market." She paused. "They don't anymore." He didn't apologize for that. Clearwater's owners had wanted to sell. He had provided a fair exit. That was the arrangement. "I'm not here to acquire your farm," he said. "Then what are you here for?" He thought about the question. He thought about it honestly, which was something he didn't always do. "I'm not entirely sure yet," he said. She picked up the bundle of twine again. "Then come back when you are." He drove to the office and sat at his desk for an hour without opening his laptop. His assistant knocked twice, and he told her to hold his calls, which he had done fewer than 10 times in 11 years. He was thinking about a meeting that had happened 6 weeks earlier. His head of acquisitions, a precise man named Sterling Hartley, who wore the same brand of shoe in 4 different colors, had presented a proposal, a consolidation strategy for independent farm vendors in the Carolinas. The model was straightforward. Identify the strongest small operators, offer acquisition at a price that covered their debt but left them without the farm, bring their expertise in-house, eliminate the independent business. Cleaner for distribution. Better margins. Scalable. Everett had approved the proposal in principle. He had not thought about it again until now. $41,000. That was the number. That was the distance between Nadine Thibodeau and the version of her life where the land was hers outright, and the business had room to grow into what her hands already knew how to build. He called Sterling Hartley that afternoon. "The consolidation model," he said. "I want to see the list of targets in North Carolina." "I'll have it to you by 5, Sterling said. Maplewood Blooms was on it. Everett closed the document and stared at the ceiling for a while. There is something most people in business do not say out loud but understand instinctively. The system is not designed to reward the kind of work Nadine Thibodeau was doing. It is designed to reward scale. The assumption built into every acquisition model, every distribution contract, every commercial relationship in the floral industry is that the small operator is ultimately a temporary condition on the way to becoming either absorbed or extinct. Research on agricultural small businesses tells the story in numbers. In 2022, family farms with gross revenues under $100,000, the category Nadine's business had been in until recently, made up 46% of all American farms, but earned less than 3% of total agricultural income. The USDA reported that in the same year, the average small farm family earned more from off-farm employment than from the farm itself. These were not failing operations. Many of them were, by any reasonable measure, extraordinarily well run. They were simply doing the right things inside a system structured to make those things insufficient. For independent flower growers in particular, the pressure had intensified in the past decade. Large distributors, companies like Everett's, could offer grocery chains and hotel buyers a single contract covering volume, variety, year-round supply, and guaranteed delivery windows. An independent grower, however skilled, could not compete on those terms without the infrastructure that required capital they couldn't access, without a credit history shaped by years of operating at the margin. The Hypericum berries were perfect. The ranunculus arrangements were better than anything Kane Floral Group sourced from its 3 largest contracted growers. And none of that mattered to the model in Sterling Hartley's document, which had evaluated Maplewood blooms as an acquisition target based on land value, debt load, and owner age. Everett didn't sleep well that night. He called the market operations manager the next morning and asked a question he'd never thought to ask before. The vendors who left in the last 3 years, the independent growers, where did they go? The answer took 20 minutes. Most had sold. A few had retired. 2 had lost their land to foreclosure after failed seasons. One woman had moved her operation to her son-in-law's property in another county because she couldn't afford the insurance increase on her own. They hadn't disappeared from the flower business. They'd just lost the thing that let them do it on their own terms. He went to the market the following Tuesday. Nadine was there before the gate opened. The temperature was 31 degrees, and the forecast said it would not get above 35 by noon. He waited until 10 o'clock, when the morning rush had thinned, and she had a quiet moment behind her display table. "I want to offer you something," he said, "and I need you to hear the whole thing before you respond." She looked at him with the same directness she'd had the first time. "Go ahead. I'm not buying your farm. I'm not buying your business." He paused. "I want to offer you a preferred supplier contract. Fixed price, committed volume, 36-month term. Kane Floral Group would take a designated portion of your seasonal output at a rate that reflects actual market value rather than the wholesale discount we normally impose. You keep the farm. You keep the business. You keep the name." She said nothing. "There's a second part," he said. "I want to restructure the way we source from independent growers in the region. You would be the first partnership under that model. I would want to use your farm as a demonstration case for what the contract looks like in practice." She was still looking at him. "I'm not offering you charity," he said. "I'm offering you a business arrangement. I'll need the quantities you can realistically commit to, and I'll need to have someone walk the property to understand seasonal capacity. That's due diligence. Standard." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why?" He had thought about how to answer that. He had several versions: the clean business version, the strategic diversification version, the version about supply chain resilience that Sterling Hartley would have approved of. He chose a different one. "Because I watched you push that cart through an ice storm in December and decide where the ice would be on the pavement before you got to it. And I thought about someone I used to know who understood that some things need tending even when the conditions are wrong." He stopped. "That's not a business reason. I know that." Nadine Thibodeau looked at him for a long moment. "My mother's name was Cecilia," she said quietly. "She grew gardenias in Louisiana in August. People told her gardenias didn't thrive in that heat. She tended them every morning anyway. She paused. They thrived. Neither of them said anything after that for a few seconds. "I'll need to see the contract terms in writing," she said finally. "And I'll need a lawyer to review them. I don't have one currently." "I'll cover the legal review fees," he said. "Neutral third party, your choice of firm." She nodded once. "Then we can talk." The contract was signed 41 days later. The first delivery under the Kane Floral Group Preferred Supplier Agreement went out on a Thursday in late February. 40 dozen white ranunculus and 36 bundles of mixed winter greenery, delivered to 7 hotel accounts in Charlotte that had previously sourced exclusively from Everett's largest contracted grower in South Carolina. The hotel buyers noticed the difference within 2 weeks. 3 of them asked specifically to expand the Maplewood allocation. Sterling Hartley removed Maplewood blooms from the acquisition list without being asked. He didn't say anything about it in the meeting where it happened. Everett noticed it and said nothing either. Some corrections didn't require narration. 6 months later, Everett announced the Carolina Growers Partnership, a formal program that extended preferred supplier status to 11 independent family farms across North and South Carolina. The program included technical support, aggregated delivery logistics through Kane's existing network, and contract terms that guaranteed minimum purchase commitments across a 2-year horizon. It was structured, his CFO noted in the announcement, in a way that was more expensive than the acquisition model in the short term and more resilient in the long term. Nobody outside the company knew why the program was called what it was. The name on the official documents was straightforward, describing the geography and structure. But inside the company, in a small conference room on the 4th floor that Everett had converted to a meeting space for the new sourcing team, there was a framed arrangement on the wall: white ranunculus, eucalyptus, silver dollar stems, hypericum berries. Dried now, preserved, still recognizable. Everett's assistant had asked about it once. He told her it was from a vendor he respected. He didn't explain further. Nadine didn't know about the frame. She was too busy. Her second growing season under the contract had started, and she had hired 2 part-time workers from the county. Both women in their 40s who had found themselves suddenly without work after the textile plant 12 miles south of her farm had consolidated its processing line. She showed them how to pack the bundles, how to read the stems for quality, how to move through cold air without hurrying, because hurrying caused mistakes, and mistakes in flower farming showed up in the product 3 weeks later. One of them, a woman named Yvonne Tate, who had worked in manufacturing for 20 years and approached every new task like a system to be learned and optimized, asked Nadine one afternoon why she had gone to the farmer's market in an ice storm the previous December instead of staying home. Nadine considered the question while she was trimming stems over a galvanized bucket. "Because it was Tuesday," she said. Yvonne waited for more. There wasn't more. That was the whole answer. Because it was Tuesday, and the market was open, and her plants had bloomed, and there were people who would want them, and she had a cart and 2 working hands and $41,000 of debt that wasn't going to resolve itself by staying inside where it was warm. Because the version of herself who stayed home when the conditions were difficult was not the version of herself she recognized. Because her grandmother had grown dahlias in Mississippi in ground that other people said wouldn't hold them, and she had watched those dahlias every summer of her childhood come up exactly where they were planted, exactly as her grandmother said they would. She didn't say any of that to Yvonne. She just went back to trimming. But later, driving home on the county road, with the heater running and the radio playing something soft, she thought about the man in the expensive coat who had watched her booth for 3 Tuesdays before he said a word. She thought about what he'd said when he finally did, about tending things when the conditions are wrong, about someone he used to know. She thought she understood. Some people learn what matters to them early, when the knowing is still easy and the cost of the lesson is small. And some people spend a long time being good at something else entirely before they find their way back to what they already knew. The distance isn't measured in miles or money or years. It's measured in the number of times you drove past something that needed your attention and kept going, and the one morning you finally stopped. Yvonne turned off the radio at the county line and said it had been a good day. Nadine agreed. It had been a Tuesday.